Hey everyone, welcome back to the arena. I'm Mike David, joined by Matt Kavachis, and once again, a very special guest. If you're new here, welcome to our arena, a space in which we delve into deep conversations around people's life stories and all things health and wellness. These conversations are deep and are meant to inspire others to tap into their own vulnerabilities. I'll pass it over to Matt shortly to say hello and intro our guest. Before I do, it's love and appreciation to those who are listening. And if you know anyone who's not listening, do send this conversation their way if you think it could be of value. Over to you, Matt.
What's up, everybody? Like MD said, we got another guest here. We have Ashley McMann. Ashley is a therapist as well as a coach, which is pretty cool, pretty unique. Kind of really, you got a bunch of tools in the toolbox there that you can work with people. I'm kind of curious. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit later. Anyway, Ashley is a therapist and coach focused on really anxiety and people pleasing. So, first of all, Ashley, thank you for being here. Second of all, what I like to ask all of our guests is, who is Ashley McMann?
Yeah. Okay. So you want me to tell you a little about myself? Yeah.
I sure do.
Yeah. I'm Ashley. I'm a licensed professional counselor and anxiety coach in Austin, Texas. I mainly work with adult women struggling with anxiety, people-pleasing tendencies, struggles setting boundaries with family members, friends, loved ones in their life. I've been seeing clients and working as a therapist for a little over 8 years now, and just started venturing into the coaching space within the past year. And I really did that so it would open me up to be a little bit more accessible to those outside of the state of Texas, because unfortunately I can only see clients with my therapy license in Texas. And I wanted to be able to reach more individuals and help on a wider scale. So that's kind of why I dived into the coaching space there.
Why do you do what you do? Why therapy? Why people pleasing? Why anxiety?
Yeah, I didn't know that I wanted to be a therapist until my mid-20s. So when I graduated college, I worked in oil and gas for about 5 years as an administrative assistant. And it was honestly my own therapy that really brought this desire up for me. So I went to my own therapy in my mid-20s and really enjoyed that process and recognized that this was something that I had a desire for and I had a calling for. My own therapist told me, she suggested I go back to become a therapist. And I did major in psychology in undergrad, so I knew that it was something that I was interested in. Just wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with that. So I went to my own therapy, and that catapulted me into going back to grad school to get my license through that process. I was married at the time, and we were struggling within our relationship, and actually a few years later ended up getting divorced. We actually ended up separating the day before I started my therapy career, so the day before my first job as a therapist. And that's really what kind of catapulted me into my specialization in working with women. So in the past, I've worked with a lot of women going through divorce or families of divorce as well. And learning myself after my own divorce and working through my own people pleasing tendencies and my own struggles with setting boundaries is something that really gave me a calling for working with other women struggling with the same.
Can you just shine a light on what it's like to go through a divorce? Maybe how, now I understand, I'm sure everybody's experience is very unique and very different, but just maybe from your perspective, your personal experience, as well as kind of what you tend to see maybe with some of the people that you work with.
Yeah, it's a difficult process. I will say that for anyone. I think even if it's a mutual decision and you know it's the right decision, there's still a lot of conflicting emotions that come with that. I knew it was what was for the best, and I don't regret it. I'm glad that it happened. It's created a lot of positive changes in my life since then, and I have changed night and day since then, which is about 7 years ago. And but even though I knew it was right, and there was some relief and some excitement in starting a new chapter, there was still a lot of grief that came with that for me. And it was grieving this life that I had built for 6 years. I was married for 6 years. So this life that I had built with this individual, grieving family and friends that I had developed throughout the relationship that I couldn't carry with me to my next stage of life, and just grieving this vision of a life that I had kind of created for us moving forward. So grieving something that was no longer going to be. It was so it was a difficult process. I got right back into therapy when that happened and started working through that. Um, and yeah, it's never easy. I was lucky that I didn't have children. So that made it easier. I've worked with a lot of families that do have children, and I know that makes it difficult, but I'm always of the mindset that it's important that we do what's best for us. And that's what's going to be best. If you do have children in marriage, that's what's going to be best for the children in the long run, too. Seeing happy parents, parents that are fulfilled and can work together cohesively, is going to be what's best.
And so, what does that grieving process look like? And like, how do we allow ourselves to grieve? Like you said, you went to a therapist, and which I'm sure helped with a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
Does it have to be? I mean, I don't think it has to be. I'm sure a therapist really is supportive in that sense, in terms of like just going through the different steps. But I think a lot of us, maybe on some level, like want to grieve. We just don't really know how to.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's Grief is a very difficult emotion to process, and there's a lot that comes with grief. When you talk about the different stages of grief, and not everyone goes through every stage, and they're not consequential. We talk about denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, and it's very common to move through each of the stages and kind of oscillate between the stages in your grieving process. I also think grief is something that sometimes doesn't always come to an end. Sometimes we are continuously grieving, and we might have periods where the grief isn't very strong, and then later, the next day it might hit you like a train, right? A freight train. There's a song that I really love by one of my favorite artists called Glitter, and his name's Patrick Droney. And his mom is also a therapist. I spoke to her at a concert one time, and he got the idea from her working with grief clients to write the song. And the song just talks about how grief is like glitter. It just kind of follows you everywhere you go. And it sticks to you, and you can't get it off, or you think you cleaned up all the glitter on the floor, right? And the next thing you know, you find some glitter in the rug somewhere, and you're like, what? I thought I was done with this. Where is it still coming from? And I really love that metaphor for grief, because that's exactly what it's like. You think you got it all cleaned up. You think you dealt with everything. And the next thing you know, you find some more. And that's a perfect analogy for grief and the grieving process. And I think one of the most important things in grief is just allowing yourself to feel it. So accepting where you're at and recognizing that this is a process. And just because you thought maybe you had grieved something and then it comes back doesn't mean that you're moving backwards, and that you're not moving forward. It's just what I saw a quote the other day. It was like when you're dancing, even back steps are moving you forward, right? So recognizing that it's not a linear process, and that you just need to meet yourself where you're at each day, taking it one step at a time.
You mentioned something earlier about having to grieve the loss of a life that you were envisioning at one point for yourself. And that, I have so many questions. That's so interesting to me, because I think about children growing up with these like grand old dreams and visions for what their life could look like. And how has that process for you really changed your outlook on how you think about your life in terms of like big picture, what you're striving for, but then also having to realize that you set yourself up, for risk when you attach yourself to some of that vision. What is the outlook now, and like how do you work with people to maybe reframe that a little bit so that they don't do that?
Yeah, it's difficult because I think hope is important. I think it's important to have dreams and to have goals. Um, but at the same time, hope can also be dangerous in some aspects. And so, something that I've really focused on throughout my journey is detaching from the outcome. And that doesn't mean not having expectations at all, but trying to have realistic expectations and not have a specific outcome in mind, because I don't know what the outcome is going to be. That's something that's completely out of our control. So for me, it's really focusing on, okay, well, what can I control in this situation? And trying to accept the things that are outside of our control. So when I work with clients, I like to create little circles of control, and whether it's specific to a certain situation that they're going through or just in general, and looking at, okay, what's inside of our circle and what can we control going forward in order to provide a sense of safety and comfort, and knowing that, okay, this is what I'm in control of and this is what I can manage. Everything that's outside of that, I need to work on accepting that I can't do anything about it.
And
And part
so,
of that is the outcome.
and are there like universal things that are in each person's circle of control that we can all relate to, that you kind of fall back on as like a universal foundation?
Yeah, I mean, we pretty much all have the same things within our circle of control. Just like the basics, when you think about it, are, we have control over our actions, um, the way that we perceive things, the way we respond, the way we think. We don't have control over those automatic thoughts that just pop up, but we do have the ability to challenge those thoughts and try to change our perspective and look at things from a different point of view. We have control over our mindset, right? What we eat each day, how we spend our time, who we spend our time with, who we allow within who we give access to, those types of things.
Can I jump in there because I want to challenge something. Well, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Mhm.
When you say mindset, I think of a lot of people that come to mind in my life that have a fixed mindset, and so from their perspective, things just are the way they are. This is just who I am. This is just the way it is. And so, how do you help impart the growth mindset onto people like that are maybe more resistant to it? How do you build in that foundation of that we do have choice, that we do have the ability to shift our perspective? How do you do that for someone that's maybe stuck in that other way of thinking?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's hard if someone's a little bit more hesitant and a little bit more set in their ways. I've worked a lot with kiddos in the past, so it's really the past year and a half that I've transitioned more towards adults. But in working with children, I've worked a lot with fixed mindsets and growth mindsets, and teaching them the power of yet. And so I'll even do that with adults and go over that concept too, of just because you can't do something now doesn't mean you're not going to be able to at some point. Um, we can all adapt and change. And so a lot of times with individuals like that, it's really just challenging them gently, using motivational interviewing techniques to get them to try to see things from a different perspective and see how there could be other possibilities. Um, so it's really a lot of like gentle pushing and challenging to try to get them to see things from a different perspective. And sometimes even then, like, I'll see it start to click, but maybe they're just not there yet. They're not ready to make those steps. And with that, that's where we have to just meet people where they're at and acknowledge that everyone has to get there on their own timing. Um, and if they're not there, they're not there. And that's not something that we can really do anything about.
And it reminds me of this idea that I heard of just suffering and letting people suffer in safety, which is really powerful to me because, and it kind of goes to the idea of like the famous thing of you learn through actually doing and experiencing, i.e.,
Mm-hmm.
someone can tell you don't touch the hot stove, but kids will still do it, and then they learn actually after they touch it, and they burn the heck out of their hand. And I think sometimes the best thing we can do, I've seen it play out in my life, is to let people know that, hey, I support you. And also, like, your life, you do what you want. I'm here to support you regardless. And sometimes I had to learn the hard way, and I think sometimes others do as well. So I love that idea. I guess at the heart of people pleasing, because I just know we got a lot of people pleasers listening to this. What is people pleasing? Just give us like the overview, the broad overview of people pleasing at its core, and like how I should know if I'm a people pleaser or not.
Yeah. So people pleasing essentially for most individuals is a trauma response. When you look at the four stress responses or trauma responses, we have fight, flight, freeze, and then fawn. We don't talk about fawn very often. It's starting to be spoken about more in the last couple of years, but fawn essentially is people pleasing. It's please and appease. So it's a stress response that a lot of individuals develop from, past traumatic experiences, which when we define trauma these days, it's really just anything that's too much, too fast, too intense for our nervous system. So I know a lot of times we think that trauma has to be this big, terrible thing. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just having our emotions neglected as a child or dismissed or ignored. And the nervous system might take that on as something that's too much, too intense, feels unsafe. And then after repeated experiences, creates this trauma response, this stress response, or communication response of either, getting defensive, avoiding, freezing up, or fawning. So people pleasing, right? And so that's just pleasing and appeasing, trying not to rock the boat, trying to keep the peace so that you can avoid that discomfort, that alarm bell that's going off in your nervous system. It's a way of attending or tending to that sense of danger that's coming up for us. So for a lot of people, it's just a coping mechanism that they've learned in order to avoid this sense of or lack of safety within their system, and to avoid conflict, to avoid upsetting others, to avoid that discomfort.
And so, if we were to 101 that and bring that to life a bit so that folks can better recognize what that looks like in the day-to-day world, like how does that show up out of people in your experience?
It sounds like an illusion of control. I mean, I'm thinking back to myself. I'm definitely a recovering people pleaser. But I would say I'm recovered. Like I really don't, but I did for so long. But anyway, that's kind of what it sounded like to me when I heard what you were saying.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's a false sense of control, right? So we think that, okay, if I can control their reactions, or then I can avoid danger or avoid conflict or whatever it may be, right? Or I can avoid rejection, abandonment, these things that we're afraid of. So what that looks like in our day-to-day life is compromising our wants and needs, so not speaking up for our wants and needs in our relationships, not setting boundaries when we're unhappy with something, or we're burnt out, or we're taking on too much. So not saying no when we want to say no. So saying yes too often, overcommitting to things, not asking for what we want, right? So always, so being indecisive too, allowing other people to always make the decisions.
Stace, can I jump in there real quick?
Yeah.
Like on I really don't, guys, hand up, I really don't spend much time on Hinge. I don't, but I usually go on for like 2 minutes a day. And one of the biggest red flags for me personally is if I see and maybe this is a me thing, but if I see a prompt that's like, and the person says, I can't, like, you need to pick, I can't make decisions. Like, you need to pick where I'm like, ooh, there's something like, I don't trust myself there. There's trust, like, so I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the way I interpret it. I'm usually shy away from that.
No, I would probably avoid that too. Yeah. Yeah. It's nice when someone can make decisions. So, but yeah, they probably struggle with people pleasing or setting boundaries for themselves.
Oh, go ahead, MD.
Yeah, so I always think that when we are doing something like people pleasing as a stress response, a coping mechanism, there will always be those thoughts that rationalize it, that justify it. And, in my experience, I think subconsciously, I've always, I think, rationalized it as, oh, I'm just a nice person, or I'm selfless, or I'm a loving person. And, Matt and I have more and more recently, I should say, have been just talking about unconditional love and showing up in the world as a loving human being and really subscribing to this idea of unconditional love. How do we discern, and maybe it's obvious, right? But let's just talk it out. But like, how do we discern between the difference of showing up in the world and loving everybody versus pleasing everybody?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the biggest distinction there is really looking at your values and checking in with yourself and your wants and needs. So making sure that you're doing a needs inventory here and there and really making sure that your needs are being met, but checking in with yourself and reflecting on how you feel in your relationships. Is there some resentment coming up? Is there some frustration coming up? Some irritability? I work a lot with my clients in learning our window of tolerance. So if you've ever seen the window of tolerance, we all have this,
Mm-hmm.
window, this range within which we're able to. It's a great resource. You can just Google window of tolerance, and there's lots of images that will come up to kind of detail it for you. But um, when it's basically just this range within which we're able to tolerate the daily ups and downs, daily disturbances. Things happen every day. You get cut off driving down the road, and if you have a low window of tolerance, you're probably not going to be able to tolerate something small like that as well as you might be able to if your tolerance level is higher. So if you're taking care of yourself, if you're getting your wants and needs met, if you're setting boundaries, getting your movement in, you're getting your good sleep, all of those things, right? Your window is going to be wider and you're going to be less irritable, you're going to be more relaxed, you're going to be more balanced in life. When we're letting those things fall through the cracks, our window is going to shrink. And that is when we go into the fight or flight or the freeze and the fawning behaviors too. So we go into hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Um, Matt, did you have a question?
Oh, no, 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 no.
Oh,
I was
okay.
gonna say, and I think what's really helped for me and personally to discern whether, in terms of my actions and whether I'm just a nice person, if I'm doing this maybe for different reasons, is really the intention behind it. I think that requires a lot of honesty with self,
Mm-hmm.
but am I doing this because I genuinely want to be in this environment? Am I saying yes because I know this is going to make me, energized or happy? Am I giving out of genuine support for this other person because I really want to? Or am I doing it because I'm feeling guilty if I don't? Or I think they may not like me if I don't? Because to me, that's much more selfish. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not judging, but I think that's much more selfish than doing something because you genuinely want to. So for me, what's really helped me personally is asking myself, like, what's the intention behind saying yes to this thing or saying no to this? And that's really helped personally. I don't know if that's something,
Yeah.
maybe just another tidbit.
No, yeah, I agree. Asking yourself the why, right? Like, why am I doing this? Um, I think that's a great point to make. And really checking in within that, checking in with how you feel in your body. So our body knows before our mind does typically. I mean, I think of there was something a couple of years ago that I was really struggling with. It was a group that I was in, a social group, and the last couple of times I went to it, I was feeling really anxious every time I went, and I just kept going. And there's something that I was like, why do I keep doing this? And I kept going because I was trying to please others. I didn't want to upset anyone. I didn't want to let anyone down by, but there was this part of me that knew I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't feel like it was my table to be at, right? Um, but I kept going. And then finally, the last time I was driving to it, and I was like, you know what? Just check in with your body. Like, really focus on how you're feeling here. Why are you doing this? And it doesn't really matter if they're upset or whatever it may be, right? And I was just so anxious inside, and my gut was twisted. And I finally just like realized, like, okay, my body is telling me I do not want to do this. So I didn't go. I turned around and I went home and I never went again. But it's the point is really trying to get in tune with your intuition and what your gut is telling you, and recognizing when it's telling you, hey, this isn't the right thing for you. And that can be difficult to differentiate sometimes between, is this just anxiety coming up, or is this my intuition telling me that I don't want to be here? And a good indicator for that is when it's your intuition and your gut, there's not a whole lot of confusion. There's more peace. There's just kind of this knowing. With anxiety, it's more it's more of a panic. You're getting that, your heart racing, your breathing is more shallow sometimes. It's more of that like physical discomfort in your chest. So there's a little bit of a difference in how that feels in your body.
And I hope everyone listening to that takes some. I want everyone to feel validated in terms of if you're struggling with people pleasing, struggling more generally, because you just heard from a therapist who studies this work, who does this for, who understands like what it is, where it comes from, that is still like has experiences of people pleasing. So I just hope that shows people, and I hope you offer yourself some compassion if that is you, that hey, if you do it, it's normal, and you have a choice to choose you going forward, and to recognize maybe some of your patterns and improve them in ways that are going to benefit your long-term well-being. So I think that's just a great I think it's just a great example of that. Hey, we're humans at the end of the day. Like, we all know, I think, at the end of the day, what we need to do, where we need to go. That doesn't make it necessarily any easier. And the last part that I just loved is, what I've heard that has played so true in my life is the mind catches up to what the body already knows. And we can resist, and we can continue to resist, because I did, but that discomfort doesn't go away. It gets louder and louder and louder. And eventually, I hit my rock bottom, and I was like, all right, I got to do this. And so if it feels off, it probably is.
Yeah.
And kind of just staying a little bit on this pleasing topic, Matt and I, we talk frequently about, there's people that we have had to maybe decide we're not going to spend as much time with, like they don't belong in this circle anymore. And at one point or another, like, they were identified as a friend, right? And so, I've heard Matt say this many times, where it's like, I don't want to put my energy into this person anymore. And at the same time, like, we have this like heightened awareness these days around who is suffering and how that shows up in their lives. And like, we have, I think, more empathy for people who are projecting in certain ways. And so we understand it's not so much intention or intentional coming from them, the way that they're showing up in that circle. And yet we still will consciously make a decision to create distance between us. And I'm just wondering, like, how, like, for some people who believe, oh, well, I can fix them, or, I want to still love them because they're a person and I understand why they are the way that they are. How do we sort of reconcile that desire to still be there for this person, but also protect sort of that space to not really let them hinder kind of this like self-love shield, if you will?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And as they say, empathy without boundaries is just self-destruction. And so we can have empathy for others while still setting boundaries. A lot of times people think that, you can't have both, and you can, because it's okay to understand someone's behavior. That doesn't mean you have to accept it and allow it. And I know that can be a really hard process sometimes when you recognize, okay, maybe this person isn't growing with me, or they're not aligned with me, my values anymore, because our values change throughout the years too, and other people's do as well. But I think the biggest thing for me is, and something I always tell myself and my clients, is we have to meet people where they're at. And sometimes we get stuck in this idea of, especially as individuals who tend to people please, that, I can change them. And we see the potential and we recognize like they could get there. There's the potential and the possibility for them to get there. But if we hold on to that, most of the time we're probably going to find ourselves very disappointed and resentful at some point, because there's no guarantee that they're actually going to get there. And it's not fair to them or to us to hold that expectation and that hope that they might get there someday. We have to meet people where they're at right now and go off of that and readjust how we allow them to show up in our lives and the accessibility that we give to them based on where they are today. Does that mean that that can't maybe change down the road? No, it can, but I don't think it does us a lot of good to hold on to that hope. So that's the biggest thing for me, is just recognizing, okay, I need to meet this person where they're at.
And I think that's probably the most the most loving thing you can do sometimes. Like the more I've thought about it, I don't think necessarily the most loving thing to do is trying to fix people that don't want to be fixed. I think that's more comes from a place of maybe my ego and thinking that I've got all the answers. So you're going to say something.
It's sort of off topic. We've talked to therapists on this show before, and Matt, I don't know if you noticed, but like I can just sense like a calmness and a very even keeled demeanor about Ashley and the way that she speaks, the way that she receives questions. I'm wondering, Ashley, do you recognize that of yourself as you've gone through this journey of becoming a therapist, getting very embedded in this sort of space and understanding of self-love and everything that you have been through? Are you slower to anger? Do you feel a shift and a transformation in just how you carry yourself in the world? Because I certainly like notice it. Like you can almost tell when you're talking to somebody who is in the therapy space. I'm just wondering if like you've noticed that growth of yourself and how you feel you've shown up differently in today's world versus maybe yesterday's.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I do get that quite often, and I'll be honest, a lot of times I am actually anxious inside, um, but nowhere near as much as I used to be. I struggled with panic attacks through high school, up until my divorce a couple of years ago, and haven't had a panic attack in a couple of years. I do notice, especially in these last couple of years, I am pretty slow to anger. I don't really get angry. Um, Sometimes I do, with like little annoyances, like I get upset or annoyed, but it's pretty easy for me to detach from other people's reactions and their actions. And that's something that I've done a lot of work on, and that's what's helped me the most. I don't know if y'all read The Four Agreements. Um, it's a great book. I recommend everyone read it.
I just posted about it on LinkedIn. I just created a
Yeah.
post. It's a great book. If someone they asked me a question, I said if you could recommend one book that everyone read, what would it be? And I wasn't really sure, and I said The Four Agreements. I think it lays
Yeah.
out the foundation to live a joyful, peaceful life.
Yeah, it's an excellent read. I try heavily to follow through with do not take things personally and don't make assumptions. And those two agreements have really helped me to be more even keel, more relaxed, to not take on other people's emotions, or their reactions as something within me. So, yeah, I think so. I try to recognize that we're mirrors and we just mirror to other individuals their own insecurities. Um, and a lot of times things are being projected onto us. And recognizing that and having that awareness has really allowed me to just show up in a calmer, more relaxed state.
Shifting gears a little bit, Ashley, thank you for that. One of your pieces of content reads about, not allowing loneliness to convince you to go back to what you don't deserve. And, I remember we went to like a Jay Shetty show at one point, and he talked about, the difference between loneliness and solitude. And just in your experience, what can you impart on us in terms of like, why people might struggle with loneliness so much, and is this like a fear-driven mechanism where to run away from loneliness they'll run back to something that's burning them? What can you say to that?
Yeah, I do think it is a fear. It's a a fear-based response. Um, Most of our unhealthy responses are based out of fear, right? Or just discomfort. And loneliness is, really just that desire for connection, which we all have, and it's normal. We're humans, we need that connection. But there's other ways that we can find that connection other than a romantic partner or um, an unhealthy toxic relationship. But a lot of times it's that desire to avoid whatever discomfort is coming up in the loneliness. Our feelings are temporary, they're normal. No feeling is bad. All feelings are good. We need them, they're guides to help us move forward and to help us decipher which direction we need to go in, right? The problem is a lot of times we don't know how to sit with those feelings. We haven't been taught, and a lot of discomfort comes up with those feelings. So that desire to run back to someone, so those emotional urges that we get, anytime we have an emotion, we have an emotional urge, whether it's to pick up a glass of wine, to text your ex, right? Whatever it may be. And sometimes those emotional urges are not healthy. They're not what's best for us. But those emotional urges are an attempt to ease that discomfort that's coming up in our body because of those feelings. So when we learn how to sit with that discomfort and when we learn how to just sit with those feelings and recognize this is just temporary, I'm okay, I can sit here and I can be uncomfortable, we're able to fight off those emotional urges and choose healthier patterns of behavior for ourselves.
And what are maybe some of those healthier patterns in terms of, rather than picking up the bottle of wine, eating the
Yeah.
junk food, whatever it might be, what are some things we can do instead?
Instead of texting the ex, call your friend or go for a walk, go for a run. That's my big one. Anytime I'm um, anxious or upset or down, I go for a run, and that it helps me get through, and just like discharge that energy in my body too. So finding healthier ways to get movement in as well, whether that's just intuitive movement, dancing in your kitchen, singing, things like that. So finding other ways to sit with that discomfort and then release that physiological sensation that's coming up in your body, that energy afterwards.
So what I heard is really just encouraging presence.
Mm-hmm.
Anything to bring you back to the present moment, less up here, whether it's dancing, movement. I think a great one that I've realized recently, just very recently, is breath work,
Mm-hmm.
especially for anxiety. That 4-8 breathing, the parasympathetic breathing, it's the most foolproof way that I've ever used in terms of just like relaxing. You do it for 5 minutes. In my experience, you're guaranteed to slow down. Like it's like a little hack. Is that? Do you recommend that for clients? Have you ever done that? Because I've never seen something where you don't even necessarily. I mean, I do, but like I don't even think you have to be super, super, super present. If you can be present enough to actually just do it consistently for a few minutes, it will work.
Yeah, breathwork's great. I recommend that a lot of times to my clients, um, in the moment to bring you back to the present moment, so to ground you and bring you back to earth, right? Um, just to kind of like snap you back to reality. Because when we're in those stress responses, a lot of times we go to our head and overthink things in order to avoid what's coming up in our body. So overthinking is a protective mechanism, um, it's a form of avoidance. So if we can, the problem with that though is it oftentimes just exacerbates those feelings and creates more anxiety or creates more sadness, whatever it may be. So we can get back into our body through breath work, slowing down. So really you want to think about just slowing down. Um, that allows us to be more present and more grounded and think about things more rationally as well.
Earlier, you had mentioned having specialized with working with women, and as somebody who aspires one day to be in an intimate relationship with a woman, as it relates to people pleasing, does that show up differently for women, and how can I better recognize and be supportive of somebody if I do recognize that of somebody in that sort of relationship? Because I certainly wouldn't want that person to be kind of exhibiting sort of that stuff that you help people work through. So I'm just curious, like in your experience working with women, is there anything that us men can learn about that?
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily shows up differently. They're both they both present pretty similarly in men and women. I do work with some men, and it looks very similar. It's just, compromising your wants and needs, not asking for the things that you want, not setting those boundaries, the indecisiveness. Uh, that's something that we individually have to work through on our own. But something that your partner can help with is just helping to create a sense of safety in asking for those wants and needs, right? So checking in with them on, okay, um, what can I do to help you feel a little bit more comfortable coming to me and communicating those wants and needs? So really just opening up the space for open, transparent communication and allowing them to um, express themselves, express those wants and needs, practicing active listening skills. So really letting them know, like, I'm listening to you, I hear you, reflecting back what you're hearing from them, right? So I think just if you notice that you are with a partner that has people pleasing tendencies, just making sure that you're really checking in and you're having um, that consistent communication.
Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting because I grew up with like a best friend that I've known since third grade, and I mean, third graders, right? We're 8 years old, and to this day, they will never make decisions. And when we used to hang out, on a Saturday, it was like, oh, what should we do? And the response I would always get was, whatever you want to do, and they were always just down for whatever. And, I always felt on the receiving end of that end of the relationship dynamic, this is a friendship, that in the back of my mind, I was always wondering, like, is this person actually enjoying what we're doing? Like, what do they want to actually do? And obviously at 8 years old, there's no development or awareness of like creating a sense of safety. But it's so interesting, because there was the instincts at times to really like take a step back and ask the person like, hey, like what, like if you had to make a decision, like what would we do? And that's just an interesting way to think about like your role in a relationship with somebody who is in this people pleasing circuit of behaviors, to really just check in with them, and first thing being to have them feel a sense of comfort to be able to safely share like what is it that they would like to do with their time in this moment, or how are they actually feeling with what we're currently doing. So I don't know, just this conversation has brought me back to, I don't know, 20 something years ago, with a friend that still have an amazingly close relationship with. So it's just interesting to think about that.
I think it's
Yeah.
important too to just like highlight like, what do you need? Like, I just want you to know that whatever you decide here is you have my support. And I think just giving them that sense of, because I think what they really need, people need in those, is just a sense of safety, is a sense of trust that I'm not going to disappoint you. And once people have that, I think we all know, deep down, we have needs. We kind of, to an extent, know what they are. We're just a little afraid to exercise that birthright that is getting them met. And on the flip side, Ashley, what would be the opposite of people pleasing? Would it be somebody that's just hyper focused on themselves? I don't want to say like like a narcissist or anything like that, but like people that don't invest in relationships, that are solely focused on themselves. What would be like more of the opposite of people pleasing on the unhealthy side?
Yeah. I mean, I guess selfishness.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just people that are more concerned with what they want, very set in their ways,
like hyper independent almost. Because I feel like they're both selfish at the end of the day. I mean, like not like people pleasing to me is somewhat selfish, and I think
It is.
on the other side it is too. I'm just, maybe hyper independent. I don't know. I was just curious.
Yeah, I don't know what it would be titled or what you would label that exactly, but um, and I don't know if hyper independence, because even with hyper independence, sometimes people are still willing to do things for others. Hyper independence is more they don't want anyone to do anything for them.
Uh,
But I think, yeah, probably just individuals that are very set in their ways, not very rigid. So rigidity, like not flexible, not, you know, individuals. And I'm sure we've all come across an individual like that where, they want to go eat where they want to go eat every time. They want to play the game that they want to play, and there's not a whole lot of compromising.
and what role does self compassion play in healing people pleasing tendencies? Because I think a lot of people more generally are just hard on themselves. Like, oh, I know I'm saying yes to this even though I don't want to. And like, what is wrong with me? Why am I, And so I guess what role does self compassion play in the healing journey?
Yeah, it plays a huge role. I think in any healing journey, self compassion plays a huge role because shame keeps us stuck. Shame does not allow us to move forward. Um, and so it's important that we work through any shame that's coming up, and we allow ourselves to feel it, but that we also address it with self compassion. Self compassion allows ourselves to meet us where we're at and take things one day at a time, recognizing that we're human. It's a process. We're not going to just snap out of people pleasing overnight. Um, it's something that takes time. And even years later, you still might people please sometimes. I don't know if it's something that ever completely goes away, but showing yourself compassion for where you're at and acknowledging that you're human, you're going to make mistakes sometimes. You're not always going to get it right, but that's okay. And I think it's a really important part to the process in order to continuously keep moving forward and not get stuck in that shame spiral.
So, kind of a full circle back to you talking about having to sort of separate from this version of a life that you'd once envisioned. And now, one of the themes that I think have come up in our conversations and that rings true over and over is that we've turned pain into purpose. And clearly your practice, what you do and how you help people is very closely aligned to something that you yourself have been through. And yet there is still this idea of detaching from any sort of outcome of what you want your life to be. So in the head and heart of Ashley McMann, like what can we learn from you in terms of how do you view your current purpose, your life purpose, if you will?
It's a good question. I think my purpose right now, or really my mission, is just to help others feel more connected with themselves, to realize that they can choose themselves, and that in choosing themselves, there are going to be people out there that will love that whatever version it is that they do choose of themselves. I think a lot of times, for me, something I really struggled with was if I am fully myself, and are there going to be people that allow me to sit at the table with them? Are there going to be people that accept me for who I am? I always felt like I kind of had to mold myself into what I thought other people wanted me to be in order to be accepted. Even though I didn't even want to sit at a lot of those tables. I didn't maybe like those people or weren't aligned with them. And so my purpose is really to show others that there are people that are going to accept you for who you are. And you can live in alignment with your life and be happy and be content and be fulfilled.
Isn't that crazy that almost everyone wants to be somebody that they're not, or thinks they're supposed to be somebody that they're not? And in reality, if we were just all who we really are, I mean, we'd be rocking and rolling. It's just crazy to me because I hear it on every single person I talk to, myself included, is thought we've needed to mold ourselves to be someone we aren't. And also, what you said that I really resonated with is that, and I've seen it play out for me personally, is that in choosing ourselves, we're able to do ultimately what I think we try to do when we people please, which is to help other people. I've been able to help so many others by choosing myself and pouring from a full cup and overflowing with the love that I have for myself and choosing myself, that it just allows me to invest in others, because I'm not focused on myself for the most part. Like I'm good. I take care of myself. My cup's full. Now I just get to go have the positive influence. And it was something that I struggled with going before that. It was like I was pleasing everyone at the expense of myself, and it's exhausting. It's not sustainable. And you don't even feel good after, because you're also often saying yes to things that you don't even want to do, or and you have your needs not met. So I think that was just a great way to kind of wrap things up. Did you have any questions before I asked the doozy at the end? No.
No.
Ashley, what are you most proud of?
Was this the doozy?
That's the doozy. Not too bad, right? It's a fun question.
No. What am I most proud of? Um, I think probably my independence. I think little me, um, looking, looking back, little me probably wouldn't think that I would be where I am today. Um, on my own, a single woman, mid-30s, with my own business, and able to provide for myself and give myself the life that I want. And I think that's probably something that I'm most proud of, and little me is probably most proud of as well.
Wow. How cool is that? We haven't had that answer before, but it all ties back to like our personal story and the person that we were versus the person that we become. Ashley McMann, thank you so much.
Thank you.